Silver just closed out 2025 with a 144% gain. But something that Trump just announced here this week could send a second wave of silver's price run up that could make silver get to over $100 an ounce, which would be absolutely historic. I'm going to show you the three charts that explain why 2025 was just a setup, what Trump's tariff war means for industrial silver demand, and the exact levels I'm watching out for. We've got a lot to cover today, so be sure to be tuned in. Okay, quick context before we dive in to the Trump tariff impact that we've seen here shortly, because we've seen this chart, right? Silver started around 2025 with about $24 per ounce. Then by December, it was at an all-time high, nearly around $94. That's a 144% gain. Its biggest annual gain since 1979, where silver jumped 434% during the Hunt brothers' famous silver short squeeze, right? So remember, this is a short squeeze, but here's what most people don't realize. This 2025 rally was driven by supply deficits and industrial demand. That is the interesting thing. And the reason why silver outperforms gold in situations like this is because silver has industrial applications where gold simply just does not. So we see silver, the highs get higher, the lows get lower. It's more of a volatile asset when compared to gold when you're looking at the precious metals market. Now, this is where things get very interesting because there's three catalysts that really drove all of this. And I'm going to get into all three here in a minute. But we're now in year 5 of consecutive supply shortages for all of this. So as you guys know, hard assets, right? We really start to see that. So how many of you guys, let's say in this chat or in the comments watching this, actually own silver? Let me know in the comments of all this, because I am honestly generally curious if anybody actually owns any physical silver. Because to be honest, I think everybody just owns paper silver, which, you know, paper silver, paper gold, we do see that interaction in gold going up here very bigly, right? Because now when we see this, right, gold and silver absolutely going up, but this is where, you know, Trump has had this catalyst that everybody's missing, right? On January 20th, his inauguration day, Trump didn't just threaten tariffs on China. He specifically mentioned 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico as well. So if you go back to all of his different tariffs, and I sifted through all of this and the timeline so you guys didn't have to, but you know, he went into 2025, his inauguration day, with a few different things, right? He said specifically the 25% tariffs on China and Mexico, which is very interesting. But there's a huge silver angle nobody's connecting, right? Let's start with the first one. Why are we seeing some issues here? Well, it's because there's been a massive increase in solar power. This green energy is what they've been pushing like crazy, right? For better or for worse. And China produces 80% of the world's solar panels. And here's why that matters, because every single solar panel uses silver. It's not optional. Silver is the most conductive metal, so it's essential for these types of applications. And a 10% tariff on Chinese goods means one of two things happens. Either the U.S. solar company pays higher prices, which gets passed to the consumers. That slows solar adoption slightly. But here's the twist. Global solar demand is exploding. China, India, and the Middle East are building solar farms at record pace. So even if U.S. demand softens, global demand still picks up the slack because silver is a precious metal. Therefore, there is not a lot of demand from the United States just in general. Like a little drop in from the U.S. is not going to make a huge difference. Then the supply chains could get rerouted, right? Maybe you manufacture shift to Vietnam or Thailand or somewhere else to maybe dodge the tariffs from the United States. But this takes more time. So moving silver in the precious metals market, obviously, you know, when you have a heavy precious metal and you need to reroute some of these things, well, that's where you start to see the price adjustment. And either way, it's either higher prices or supply chain, and this causes the higher prices. So I'm seeing a lot of changes here, but this is just the first reasons that the Trump tariffs matter. The second is actually bigger and has to do with something happening in Mexico right now that most people don't even realize, right? There is a massive increase in electric vehicles. Mexico is becoming the largest electric vehicle manufacturer, and that is absolutely exploding because they're building massive plants in Mexico. Labor costs are lower, and it's right on the US border for easy shipping. But here's the silver angle that everybody's missing. A standard vehicle uses about 25 to 50% or 50 grams of silver per car, which is double what the traditional gas power car uses. So EVs have way more electrical components and battery management systems and all of these things that require more silver. So when Trump slapped that $25 or 25% tariff, Mexican made vehicles got more expensive. So automakers, car manufacturers, they could either eat that cost or pass it to the consumers. Or manufacturers could start moving production back to the US, which would take a shift, and it would take a 2 to 3 year timeline to get all that. So during this transition, the silver breakdown and the lockup of silver really continues to shine here. So this precious metals market is now starting to see the difference and the supply shock. And so what is very interesting is this silver run-up is not necessarily all just macro related. Of course, there are those macro factors, and there is some distrust in the dollar, which I'm going to get into in a bit. But when you really break it down and take a step back and look at how these precious metals markets react, we had the Hunts brothers that essentially did the entire supply squeeze, which caused silver to skyrocket in flight. And then on the other side, we have what is going on right now. There's distrust in the dollar. There's greater manufacturing demand. And at the end of the day, we're seeing inflation rise up. So there's a combination of that supply squeeze as well as distrust in the dollar, which makes for historic runs in silver. Now, outside of the electric vehicles, what else do we have going on here, right? We have that 5-year break-even inflation rate, which is still holding very strong through all of this, right? Because it's got an inflation hedge narrative, right? Here's the macro setup. Tariffs at the end of the day can equal inflation if manufacturing isn't moved quickly. And we know this from history. When Trump imposed a steel and aluminum tariff in 2018 and 19, well, inflation expectations rose, the dollar weakened, and the precious metals rallied. Gold first and silver caught up. But here's the difference between 2018 and now. In 2018, silver was coming out of a bear market. It was weak, unloved, and lagging gold. So when tariffs hit and inflation fears spike, silver took months to respond. Now, in 2026, silver just had the best year in 46 years, literally, and it's already in a historic bull market. Sentiment is bullish, supply is tight, and industrial demand is surging. So when tariffs reignite inflation fears, silver doesn't have to wake up from a bear market. It is already running, folks. So tariffs are just adding fuel to that existing fire. And at the end of the day, when you look at the correlation between CPI and silver, it is very close, right? It looks at as a safe haven. Not because it's just a monetary metal, but because it has a monetary metal application and an industrial metal application like copper. So it combines the positives of copper and gold and makes it all into one, making it a lot more volatile of an asset, right? So there's a lot of, I guess, the psychology around this, right? When you start to see how silver market is pumping and compare it to, what we're seeing with the other markets. I mean, at the end of the day, silver is more than likely going to hit, let's say, $100 an ounce here very soon, because not only are we seeing silver at just under 95%, well, in just about a little over 7 days, 8 days or so, there's a 95% chance we are going to see interest rates cut. So with this 95% chance, with the narrative already that silver is, an inflation hedge, that's where we're going to start to see things get wonky, folks, because if the Fed stays put here, and Trump obviously is going to start to put somebody in the Fed chair's place, replace Jerome Powell with somebody who wants essentially 0% interest rates, that's where we're going to start to see inflation and things pump into the market. I think the market right now is pricing in cuts, but waiting until later in the year. And so everybody's being patient right now. And that's why we're seeing kind of some stagnation in the market outside of the silver markets. But we are seeing, not the best start to the dollar here this year to date, just about 0.35% with this bad red day that we have here. Last year, we had one of the worst years for the dollar and the Dixie, the dollar index, since 1973, which is like a couple years after we went off the gold standard. So just knowing that, there's less and less faith in the US dollar as there is, since we essentially went off the gold standard. We've never seen it quite this low for this amount of time. And we've never seen it at the same time when we're seeing stuff like the stock market, the S&P rallying. Sure, we're at 6,800 and year to date, we're actually down 1%, but we're still very close to that all-time high. That all-time high was at, nearly at 7,000. We didn't quite reach it, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see 7,000, especially, when we start cutting interest rates later this year. And at the end of the day, all of this stuff is correlated, right? We are still looking at how the silver markets are performing, and we're looking at how the gold and precious metals markets are reacting to all of this, because gold had a record price jump, 65%. Silver had a record price jump, 144% back in 2025. So we're going to start to see that. We got the legend Ben in the chat. What's going on, Benny boy? Hope all is well. And, we're starting to see silver really crank it up, to say the very least. And I mean, like anything from even like precious metals, holding silver coins and all that, people are going to be looking to get away from this, from just, traditional, let's say, assets and more into more of the inflation hedge assets like gold and silver. So I'm going to be covering all this. Make sure you guys are smoking that like Cheech and Chong, hitting that subscribe button, telling a friend to tell a friend, and I'll catch you guys all at the next one.